Good afternoon, everyone who's connecting from Europe. Good morning, everyone who's connecting from North America, and welcome to the Metaverse versus the Real World, a panel with educators to discuss what's real about the Metaverse and where it's going. Before we start, so I'm Chris, I'm the CEO and co-founder of BodySwaps. We are a soft skills training platform that uses VR, but I'm not going to talk about BodySwaps at all today. That was it. And before we start, I wanted to just say something. A few people have reached out to me pointing out that this was an all-male panel, which obviously is the case and obviously is terrible. So rather than looking for excuses, I just wanted to unreservedly apologize for not doing all the efforts that it would have taken to make this better. I will make it better in the future. There's now 150 participants on the chat. So I invite every one of those participants to hold me accountable to my words if I was to fail them. But now on with the panel. Why are we here today? Metaverse. You've all heard about it. There's been a lot of buzz. There's been a lot of announcement by Facebook, Niantic, Microsoft, Epic. There's been more or less well-produced corporate videos, a lot of sarcasm, and a lot of confusion. All that noise has come from tech people, all right? Tech journalists, tech investors going crazy about crypto, tech vendors, and everyone is saying that education is one of the pillars of the metaverse, but we haven't heard from educators. And so when you Google the metaverse this is actually what you find. It's a dystopian nightmare, it's coming, it's scary, or it's for babies, which I'm still trying to understand. So today I'm joined by 4 panelists. They are all educators primarily, and they work with VR, with AR, with AI, and a ton of technologies that are going to underpin that vision of the metaverse. And together we're going to discuss the opportunities, how is this going to change education for the better, but also the dangers and limitations of the metaverse. We'll do a little bit of a crystal ball gazing exercise at some point around the year 2030, and then we'll come back to reality, to right now, and how to get started. So before I start, I'm going to ask one question to each of the panelists. And that question is, can you tell me in your own words, not the definition of the metaverse, but an example of the metaverse being realized concretely, whether it's today in your institutions or something that you can imagine being real in a few years. And before I ask you one by one the question, I'm going to just give a quick bio. So I'm going to start with Michael. Michael is a professor, faculty facilitator, and educational technology coach at George Brown College in Toronto, Canada. Michael is leading multiple XR pilots. He is, in his own words, an educator first, a technology second, and a general cynic somewhere insert. So Michael the Cynic, please tell us an example of a realized version of the metaverse.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for everybody for attending. I can talk about one example of what we're doing is we're creating digital twin spaces at George Brown College, and we're using them for teaching. One of our specific programs is event planning. So just last week, we had 30 students in a space in Engage VR. Shout out to Daniel. And we'd scanned the Hilton Hotel in Toronto, the conference area. And in that conference area, we actually had students moving tables around, figuring out the egress and ingress of clients. And they were able to actually move things around. And the faculty member was in the space directing them and giving them feedback while they were there. And it was a really interesting experience. And we think that this is kind of the way that we would see it being used as hands-on activities that they couldn't really ever do in a classroom.
Thanks a lot, Michael. It's a great example from hospitality. I'm going to go to Jamie now. So Jamie is assistant principal at the London Screen Academy, which is a new film and TV school for 16 to 18-year-olds. His work focuses on both LSA's innovative new curriculum and the development of teachers. Jamie is particularly interested in exploring how vocational education can help students overcome some of the barriers that might otherwise prevent them from thriving in the screen industries. Jamie, what's your view on what the metaverse could look like at the LSA?
Well, we're currently using VR to develop students' professional behaviours, their soft skills. But in the future, you know, we're a film and TV school. We work with young people. We have 650 young people, and that's a lot of young people to have on set. For example, you know, trying to learn how to use cameras and boom mics, or to do makeup or costume. So in the future, VR might be able to provide us with an online set. You know, students are working with online, you know, with virtual cameras, with virtual microphones. There's a virtual sound mixing desk, etc., etc. And suddenly you can imagine having all 700 students all working on the same projects at the same time, collaborating on that virtual set, switching roles, and, you know, rather than us having to have 4 studios all booked out with equipment and the students rotating through, which is we're lucky to have, you know, we could work at a much bigger scale. So that might be one example. If I can, Chris, just another quick one. In my role as developing teaching at the school, I think there's a lot of exciting opportunity to think about what virtual classrooms might look like from a teaching point of view, and giving teachers the chance to practice when they're learning their trade in a virtual world. You know, it's kind of crazy that the first time a lot of teachers practice, you know, giving instructions or having difficult conversations with students, it's kind of crazy that is, you know, the first time they're thrown in front of a class. And it would be great to give teachers the chance to practice those sort of skills in a safe online environment.
That's interesting, this element of practice the difficult interactions before you do it in real life, because in real life you don't want to mess up with students' education typically. I'm now going to go to Rob. So Rob was a paramedic for 35 years and also taught paramedics for 20 years. After integrating VR first into paramedic education, Rob became Georgian's college immersive tech manager. Under Rob's leadership, Georgian has deployed no less than 200 headsets and is currently running 12 VR pilots at the same time. So a lot to say here. Just one example, Rob, out of those 12 pilots.
Sure. One of the pilots we're running is for Indigenous languages. So in our Indigenous Studies program, there are 4 language courses. One is called Language in the Home, just as an example. And so it struck me that context was really important for language learning. So we built a house for them in AltSpace VR, also a home in Engage VR, and students and faculty meet there weekly to learn the language in a home. It just makes sense. VR enables people to essentially take a field trip and be able to look at objects identified in both the English and Anishinaabemowin words, and also listen to audio files and interact with objects.
Great, thanks a lot for that. That's fascinating. So we have nursing, film, language. Last but not least, Daniel. So Daniel is Assistant Executive Director at a Virtual World Society, where he leads the mission for a global XR community for good. Daniel has many hats. One other hat is that he's the founder director of Educators in VR, where he empowers a community of educators to democratize what he calls the next paradigm of learning and education. Daniel, I guess you have a broader view because you're not tied to a specific institution. That's why I wanted to end with your words. What does the realized version of the metaverse look like to you?
Hi, thanks, Chris, for having me on. Yeah, I've looked at VR from a number of different angles. I think with regards to the metaverse, maybe the way I see it is the technology up until recently has allowed for individual and shared compelling experiences. But as adoption increases, more and more people are having these experiences in parallel. If you can connect them, then at some point the metaverse, quote unquote, kind of is always on. And as adoption grows, then it's not just a single person having a single experience, but there's a connection of people having experiences. And when the technology enables us to go from one experience to another seamlessly and meet across platforms, then it becomes, yeah, an always on virtual space. For me, that is the beginning of the metaverse. When you then build in a marketplace where people can share and earn a living, for me, that's getting close to fully realized. But there's a lot of technological challenges that we have to solve for until we get there. I think the difference is, at the moment, for me at least, in the last 2 years, we've gone from predominantly single-use experience, then social VR has really come to the fore. And now, this last year, we're getting closer to understanding when social VR is fully adopted and it's busy, the natural extension of that will be that's the beginning of what I see as the metaverse.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about the first topic, which is looking on the bright side of the metaverse. And we had some examples when we dig deeper conceptually around how the classroom experience might change. So by the way, everyone who's on the chat, please do ask questions. We'll try to take some of those. But in the meantime, I'm going to share a slightly cheeky slide with you. So I ask all the panelists, I send them a questionnaire, and I wrote down a number of statements, and I asked them to rate those statements from 1 to 4, 1 being, this is totally unrealistic in 5 years, and 4 being, yes, this is going to be the new normal. So here's statement 1. On-campus activities, especially classroom-based, will be partially replaced by social VR experiences. We have Daniel, who thinks this will be the majority of institutions doing that, whereas Michael said that it was unrealistic. Michael, do you wanna start and tell us why you were on that side of the spectrum, maybe?
Well, I think you put me on this side of the spectrum because clearly I'm a contrarian. So I will accept that. Now I'm wearing these headsets just to make it a little bit more confusing for everybody. The classroom-based issue about it being replacing classroom-based learning concerns me. I work with faculty every day with virtual reality and extended reality applications, thinking of ways that we can start to use VR to increase their learning and to help them understand skills. But the classroom, I think, is vital. The physical classroom is vital. And I think if we start to think about how we can replace or move that classroom experience online, that's where I really have concerns. I can share just a quick anecdote with you. I was teaching grade 11 English literature in Santiago, Chile. So saludos. So I see an Argentinian on the list. So saludos to South America. And after recess, all the students would come into the classroom smelling like they'd been playing soccer for 15 minutes. And as they came into the classroom, you know, the learning experience, the learning environment has smell and it has taste and it has touch and it has all the senses. And people are really in that space. And all that socializing is part of the learning experience. So us, for educators, our job is not just to teach, in that case, English literature, but to teach people how to react and how to interact with each other. And I think moving online, we're going to lose a lot of that. And that greatly concerns me, that we think about, oh, well, let's just move some of these parts onto it, into the metaverse, and then maybe we lose some of that connection. So that for me, and also working with faculty, we're a long way from, in my belief, from really having meaningful replacement classes in XR.
That maybe if I go to Daniel now, and by the way, Jamie and Rob or any panelists, don't hesitate to use the hand icon if you want to jump in and disagree with Michael. But Daniel, I think what Michael is pointing at is that it's not going to be a 100% in VR or 100% in the classroom. There's going to be good use of virtual reality for social gatherings and bad uses of it. Can you tell us, because you've done a lot of VR experiences with classes, what works and what doesn't?
Right. So the question we're looking at there's a couple of qualifiers. First of all, will be partially replaced. That's quite open, right? You partially could mean 5%, could mean 95%. So I just went with my gut feeling as to what you meant there, and I think this is also not something that I particularly want or don't want. I'm not saying it's going to be like that because I think it's right or good or I want it that way. I just think we are in the next, and we already are, starting to see some use cases, applications where it can, let's say, extend classroom reality, based activities. And so I'm not focusing so much on the replacing it as in extending classrooms, but then I think by necessity also there are some locations, like I think geographical locations, where at the moment already the internet is just like internet-based learning is really, really vital, and you couldn't reach people without. And I think in situations like that, we will find applications of this technology where in-class teaching would be difficult. VR could be a solution. Rob mentioned, what was it, field trips? Field trips is a perfect example, right? I guess I'm getting away there from the definition of classroom-based stuff. I imagine that when you have, I don't know, a classroom of architects, they might be doing stuff in class, but the headsets will be lying next to them. They can put the headsets on and then visit their models, or go and visit the Empire State Building or the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So yeah, maybe I took a cop out and I didn't go with the strict definition of replacing stuff. I don't know that it will or should replace stuff. It certainly will augment classroom stuff.
I'm keen to get Rob's view on that, because what is important in that question is that the meaning of classroom itself is changing. So it's not about recreating a digital twin version of the actual classroom just to put people in there. It's, as in Rob's example, creating an indigenous home, which is not something that is possible on campus. And so where do you see VR complementing the classroom, adding to the learning experience, Rob?
Yeah, I think up front, what I would say is what's probably most important is that educators and students start to explore virtual reality, that teachers start to get a sense of, is there good pedagogy in these experiences? Where does it fit? So we launched a whole series of pilots, over 12 of them, and we've built several virtual reality labs. And I'm already starting to see where virtual reality makes a lot of sense. For example, in language teaching, which gives you context. So if you're going to learn conversational French in a cafe, why not do it in a cafe? If you're going to learn how to speak at an airport, why not do it in an airport? So virtual reality makes perfect sense for that. And you know, is there a difference between doing that on a 2D screen versus immersive virtual reality? I think that's debatable and the research isn't there yet, but there is a sense of presence that you get when you're in virtual reality. The other thing that's really valuable, I think, in virtual reality, and it'll start to find its place in education, are experiences where you have agency. You know, Jamie and Mike talked about that earlier, where you can do things with your hands. So, for example, we're using virtual reality for anatomy in our biotech degree, paramedic program, and nursing program. And students meet in a virtual life sciences lab and with their teacher, and they can manipulate skeletal models or anatomical models, and they can have discussions around anatomy and physiology. And there, you know, that's not going to be the suitable environment for all students. But I think post-pandemic, I think universities and colleges are going to look at a more flexible enrollment model where you choose between, I want a face-to-face class, this other student wants a traditional online class, and this other group of students want a virtual reality class where they spend not necessarily all their time in virtual reality, but at least a portion of the class in virtual reality, where they have both a sense of presence. They have the benefit of infinite scalability in virtual reality, where you can see anatomical structures and enlarge them to the point where, you know, a heart is the size of a 3-story building, and you can go in and stand at the apex of the heart and look up and watch the atrioventricular valves open and close. That's a very powerful and leaves indelible memories for people. So I think virtual reality and ultimately the metaverse, and we can talk about that separately, will find its way in little niche areas, especially around experiences where you're doing things with your hands and you're learning through experiences.
So I've seen Jamie's raised his hand. What you're pointing at, Rob, is interesting. Is VR should be used when you cannot do a better job in the real world, as in either
not
it's the
necessarily.
environment, not necessarily. So what you said is there's the outside world that you can recreate in VR, you can't in the world, and there's the practice stuff that you might not be able to afford for every student.
I agree with you, but there are other examples as well where it's not necessarily better than the real world, but it's just more practical, for example, for students who are learning from a distance. So, you know, in the healthcare fields, it's beneficial to have students in a lab doing hands-on learning. But if you combine that with virtual reality, that may give students an opportunity to practice some of those skills more frequently than they would otherwise get the opportunity in a lab, as an example.
Okay. Jamie, floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm finding myself agreeing with a lot of Rob saying that. I mean, at the London Screen Academy, we are state funded, and our mission is to open up access barriers into the film and TV industry. So, especially for underrepresented groups, you know, ethnic groups, gender, or on the basis of your income background. And so, we're lucky enough to through our founders, we have access to lots of incredible film equipment. But we are always thinking, how do we expand our educational reach beyond the academy? And one of the big questions there is, okay, well, how do we take the schemes of work and the lessons that we've built up and generated, and allow teachers in other schools and institutions where they're not fortunate enough to have access to the kind of equipment we've got at this school. And so it's in that sort of scenario, which I think is quite exciting, to say, okay, well, you don't have a studio, you don't have a green screen, you don't have all this equipment, but if you have some VR headsets, here are all of our teaching materials. You can go away and learn online in a virtual world. So I think, you know, obviously we have to acknowledge that VR equipment is currently quite expensive, depending on your setup, but it's probably cheaper than you know, kitting out a whole film studio, and will only get cheaper with time, I imagine, and better. So for us as a school, in terms of scaling our impact, that's really exciting.
Does that not create greater inequity, Jamie, by offering the ideal service? Sorry, Daniel, I see your hand up. But by offering the ideal service on campus, green screen, all your great equipment, and then saying, okay, well, if you can't access that, then we're going to give you something that is not as good, but we'll give you a simulation of that. Mm-hmm. I think one of our really big concerns at George Brown, I'm sure with most educators, is that digital divide, is the equity, is these underrepresented communities not really having an opportunity to meaningfully participate. And I do think that's a whole other argument about the metaverse. But certainly hearing your comparison, it makes me think, what are we really offering those who cannot access the equipment that you have?
Can I just come back on that very briefly? I think that's a fascinating point, and yeah, we would really be concerned about furthering, you know, any inequity. But I suppose our thinking is, well, you know, what's our starting point? You know, if these schools don't have access to the equipment that we're lucky enough to have, or the VR provision, then perhaps the VR provision is a first step. And, you know, in a world where we can't probably deck out every sixth form college in the UK with a full film studio, what's the, you know, that would be my ideal probably, but what's the next best alternative, I suppose. Yeah, but I take your point, Michael, really interesting.
Daniel, you want to wrap that question up before we move on to the next subject?
Yeah, just briefly, I agree with Michael. The digital divide, I think, is going to get accentuated by virtual reality because the acceleration of it. So there's still people who are not connected to the internet globally, and not just in the typical places like the Middle East or Africa that always get mentioned in these discussions. I'm talking about London, Chicago, wherever
Toronto.
These neighborhoods, and Toronto, right? Having said that, I think it's kind of tempting to think that we've got this great new technology, and now we need to solve all these problems with it. Solve the problems we can, but there's still a lot of experimentation, exploration required, studies required. We were mentioning earlier that the first longitudinal study with Stanford in VR has just come out. That's the first longitudinal study, and we don't have the results yet. We are right at the beginning, even though 10 million Oculus Quest 2 headsets have sold now, which sounds like a lot. We've got 7 billion people on the planet and however many smartphones. It is still very much the beginning. The people here on this call, the people in the audience, we're still pioneers. We're still trying to explore this, and we're seeing the friction points and the challenges. For me, it's like solve what we can, explore where we can, and it will emerge. I think there's use cases, there's business models that we don't even understand yet that will emerge over the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years, where we might have this conversation in 5 years and say, hey, remember that webinar we were on and all our predictions were wrong, kind of thing. So I'm optimistic, but I'm also frustrated that I'd love to be able to do more for those people who don't. It would be nice to be able to use this technology to address inequity earlier than has been the case with some other technologies. That would be nice.
Can I just make one more comment, Chris, before we go on to the next question? And I've said this in a few other meetings we've had, Chris, before. I've called people out. I'm very good at calling people out. When you say that it would be nice if we could do something different than what we have, I think on this call, there are people who make decisions and people who affect learners and affect schools and affect school boards. Perhaps we can think about, if we're going to roll in an iPad pilot, are we being purposeful in where we're doing it? There's 10 million headsets. Are we changing the way that we think and say, okay, we're going to include, there's no women on this panel. Why not? Because maybe women are not underrepresented in this kind of technology. Minorities, visual minorities, racialized people. How do we be purposeful in including them in the beginning stages of this research, for example?
One little comment about that, Michael, I completely agree. In my role at the Virtual World Society, we're actually seeking for funding for a project called HomeSpark, which is doing exactly that, looking to work with 100 families, underrepresented families from communities that are disadvantaged, working with our partners to give them headsets to help their families access XR in the metaverse. I totally agree.
There's thanks a lot for this. There's quite a lot of questions in the chat and the Q&A. It's going quite fast. There's a few ones that are revolve around the same theme, which is, let's put VR as a technology to the side for a moment and take the broader picture of the metaverse. So this idea of large scale social experiences that are persistent, where students have this digital identity and go year after year and across disciplines and interact and are essentially living learning experiences in a broader sense of the term, whether it's nursing or film set, etc. Let's assume that we solve accessibility, which is a big assumption, and it's widespread. How do you see the role of the educator changing between I'm in the classroom, one too many 2-hour block, and I'm animating those experiences in a social virtual world? Who wants to go first? Raise your hand. Rob, you raised your real hand. That was faster. Well done.
Yeah. Forget the virtual hand. It's too slow. I'd have to, go through everything. So, there's so many things about virtual reality and by extension, potentially the metaverse that are quite compelling. Just as an example, so the metaverse is a social space. Some say it's a transition from the 2D internet to the 3D internet, and I'm not a futurist, or as some would say, I'm not a clairvoyant. So because I couldn't see the future in it, but the social piece is really interesting, and I have 2 university degrees, but I've never been to university. And one of the things I found with doing my undergraduate and my master's degree online is the disconnect between us and the professor and us and the students, other classmates. And so the social piece is really important, and the metaverse might be a means of obtaining that social aspect of learning. The other piece is agency, being able to do things in virtual reality and by extension, the metaverse. So I kind of envision, for example, a group of nursing students walking along a nice wooded trail together, arriving at their hospital, going up to the second floor, taking a report from the night nurses, looking at the charts, visiting the patients, taking vital signs, doing assessments, interacting with those patients, gathering their medications, administering their medications, and all the things that a nursing student and by extension a nurse would do on a day-to-day basis, and then having a debriefing with their teacher at the end of the day or at the end of the hour, whatever time period they happen to be in there. And there are two things that are really valuable in that. One is the social piece, the sense of presence that you would get in virtual reality with your classmates, and the ability to just talk with your classmates and see if they understand something better than you understand it, and by extension learn from that experience. And two, having some agency, being able to actually do things with your hands, and in so doing, really you're having an experience, not to replace clinical placement, but to supplement the clinical placement in a very powerful way. So I think the social piece is really important to meet Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the psychomotor skills and critical decision-making piece are really important for being able to supplement the real life experience, to be able to make clinical mistakes in virtual reality, so that the hopes that it doesn't happen in real life.
So that's very interesting. I'd like to go to Michael now, and the example of the Hilton hospitality builds, because what you're saying, Rob, which is quite interesting, is the learning experience in the metaverse is, rather than replacing the classroom, is the continuation of the classroom. It exists in the current pedagogical vacuum that exists between the classroom and the real world, where we often projecting students into real world without enough experience of what they have to do, leading to mistakes, which in nursing typically can be horrible. In that new kind of pedagogy, yeah, go ahead.
I really hope it completely transforms the classroom experience. The classroom, when I was teaching paramedics, I would do case-based learning, and they might get lucky enough to see an image of a sick person, but I would like to see the classroom at some point no longer be a place to lecture or have discussion, but to be able to do it in a contextual place, where you're having an actual experience, where the teacher can be there as a mentor to help scaffold the learning. So I can be there as a tradesperson, an expert in my field, helping students learn how to work at height. So I'm up there on the scaffold, to use the real world scaffold as opposed to the educational scaffolding, and I'm helping guide them so that their chances of injury in the real world are reduced. So the worst thing I think people can do with virtual reality is replicate the classroom and put it in virtual reality, have people sitting in chairs or in amphitheaters and looking at slides.
Okay, great. Did any one of you wanted to add something on what Rob said?
Yeah, I would.
Go for it.
I don't know if you've read the book Experience on Demand by Jeremy Bailenson. That really left a deep impression on me, and that fundamental idea that you can design for experiences. In education, often the holy grail is for people to have experiences. I mean, textbooks are important sometimes. Assessment is important sometimes, but there's all the pedagogical research and models that exist often center around experiences. And one of the things you can do in VR is to design for experiences. Like Rob says, if you're teaching paramedics, if you could choose between an environment that is contextual or sitting in a classroom face to face, why would you choose? I mean, there are instances where you would choose the classroom, but now we have this option of being in the theater room, of simulating an experience of car crash or emergency situations. When we haven't had that affordance or that option, we make the best of what we've got. But now we've got this ability to design experiences. And again, I go back to saying it's early days. Just because we have the ability to design for experiences doesn't mean that we will find out in 5-10 years, when we've had time to test this, that it's better, or that it's the silver bullet, or that, you know, it's the cure-all. Doesn't mean we'll find that, but we're gonna explore, we're gonna test, we're gonna see where it does fit and where it doesn't fit.
Thanks. Jamie, you want to conclude on that before we move to the next and yet very important point?
Yeah, I broadly agree with all of that. I think there is a point about designing, you know, I like that idea of, you know, learning through experience, but I also think we can get a bit carried away with that idea of, you know, being thrust into the experience and that being the best way to learn. I think there are lots of examples of where that's not a good way to learn. You know, you don't necessarily learn to be a good football player by just being thrown onto a football pitch and learning by doing. Or to take the language example from earlier, you know, actually having to go and, you know, cope in a French cafe for the first time, it probably isn't that good a learning experience unless you've gradually built up and scaffolded up to there. So I think there is, you know, there's a world for having a scaffolded approach to that, and having, you know, drills and being introduced gradually. Not to say, of course, that you couldn't be introduced gradually to a skill and then be put into the full experience, which is probably what Daniel is thinking the answer to that. But I think, yeah, we have got to be careful of this idea of immersive learning and just put them in this scenario and they all will be well. I know that's probably not what you were saying, but I think, you know, we're a school where we do a lot of project-based learning, and I think that anybody who does a lot of project-based learning, you have to be wary of the temptation to just say, right, everybody just go off and do this project and report back and we'll see how you've got on, and then you'll have learned loads of things.
Yeah, that's not.
I just wanted to put something out there, Michael, before it's not that horrible to be in a French cafe. I don't think.
Depends on the service.
Most of us now speak English. I mean, we are, you know, decent human beings and all that.
I was gonna add, I'm not sure if we're moving on to the next topic, or I can continue here, Chris.
You've got 60 seconds, sir.
Okay, so based on what Jamie was saying, and Rob and Daniel, there's an elephant in the room here, I think, and that is the educators. So Rob is talking about the example of standing on a scaffold and looking down with 30 students. That is a whole new method of teaching. We can't expect our teachers, our professors, who are already been very challenged in the last year, to go hybrid, high flex, go online. That's already been a really big challenge. To say that we're going to have educators who can now integrate those experiential activities and the traditional pedagogy together is a very big ask. And I work in a Center for Teaching and Learning, and I work with these teachers, these professors constantly, and having them shift from traditional online teaching the last 2 years traditional teaching to online teaching, and now to this experiential teaching. There's a whole bunch that has to happen. And I think education is notoriously slow. I think someone made a comment made a comment there saying that, you know, gaming is where the money is. Education is not where the money is. So how do we fund programs that are going to train these teachers to be comfortable in creating pedagogy that's valuable, rather than just say, okay, everybody, let's get the headsets, let's put them on, let's go to the Hilton Hotel, or let's go somewhere and just do it. And I think that is a very big, it's a very big thing to think about when we're talking about metaverse and experiential as well.
That's actually how Educators in VR started, on the premise that before education can really benefit from this, we have a lot of training the trainers to do, a whole lot. The demand for education, for training the educators, is going to be the first thing we need to solve, I think.
Which is another paradigm shift. Let's not spend all our money on headsets. Let's spend them on faculty
training.
Totally.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, it's interesting. You know, I've been really fortunate in that senior management at my college, Georgian College, allowed me to take the approach that I wanted, and that was to approach faculty who are early adopters and innovators, because that's where innovation comes from, is typically at the faculty level. and provide them with a virtual reality experience that I thought was very compelling. And if at least 2 of them within a program bought into it, then we launched a pilot, small cohorts, 10 to 25 students. And I think that's a good approach. It's been a good approach for us. And I think that's important for the very reason that you stated, Mike, that faculty, they're content experts, and it's very difficult to adopt a whole bunch of new technology. So it has to be done slowly, and you have to get buy-in from them. You can't say all of a sudden, okay, here are 50 headsets and we want you to start teaching online and virtual reality.
If I may join in, I wanted to share my screen, because there's this other question I had for you on the questionnaire, which was about what realistically in the next few years, what is this going to look like in terms of as an institution, you have purchased a number of existing, or you have built your own, and you have nursing, hospitality, soft skills, hard skill, diversity and inclusion. You have all kinds of experiences, all kinds of headsets. And the question was, do you think institutions by default will offer kind of like a bookable VR learning lab, a dedicated space, telling the teachers, your responsibility is not to run VR headsets in your classroom. Your responsibility is to know what tools are available, what experiences, and to send your students to that facility to do those experiences. So Daniel, Rob, and Michael, you seem to think that this was a likely scenario for institutions to be equipped. And Jamie was maybe of a different opinion, or maybe understanding the question slightly differently. So obviously, Jamie, do you wanna have a go there?
Oh, I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to go first. Yeah, and this isn't me saying that I don't like the idea of bookable VR learning labs, or even that I don't think they'll work. I think this just reflects probably my perspective in terms of the age group that we're dealing with. So we're dealing with 16 to 18-year-olds. They're still in a stage where, compulsory educational training in the UK, they have to be doing one or the other. And so if you have a 16-year-old here, who, by the way, we might have targeted because they need to develop their essential communication skills through a VR program, or their, whatever those soft skills are, there's a good chance that they're not going to have the skills they need to have the discipline to go off and use a bookable VR setup. And we tried, last year we did quite a big trial as a school with students and putting them through programs to improve their professional behaviours, and we evaluated it all. One of the big mistakes we made, or one of the big pieces of learning, was that you can't, it's very difficult just to set students off doing these things, going into the VR world and doing what you want them to be doing. I'm sure there are some similarities in higher education, but definitely with the students we were working with, we found that they would want to do other things in the VR world. So if they had access to other apps that we didn't want them on, they would do that. Or even if they were in the VR world that we wanted them to be in, they were playing around, and trying to walk out the window or dance or do anything apart from the thing we needed them to do. And so we've found that certainly with our target group of students, we've had to very tightly structure the scheme of work, the teaching activities, where we're very clearly introducing the topics. We're having discussions before the headsets even come out. We're being clear about learning objectives. We are going into the VR world and making sure they're all doing the thing they need to be doing, coming out, reviewing it together. And, it's very tightly controlled by the educator. And certainly this year, we've been doing that approach, and it's been much more successful. And I suppose it's that perspective that made me think, certainly in our context at least, although bookable VR banks might be an option, it probably won't be the primary way we use the headsets, for example.
Since you haven't raised your hands, I'm going to take the opportunity to move things forward. No, Daniel, you've raised your hands. Okay. All right. Okay, quick. Otherwise, everyone's going to have
bookable labs. If you think now about how we use the internet, or how integrated the internet has become in education, it's hard to imagine an institution not asking their teachers or their students for training or for signposting with those tools, right? If you're a university or college, it's hard to imagine them not giving you access to learn how to use Google Suite or Microsoft accounts or something like that. It's become part of how we operate in business and education and at home. And I think we will see that sooner or later to a degree, especially when the adoption, if the adoption reaches such proportions that most kids and most teachers have a device like this at home. And it's not the shiny new thing anymore, right? Right now it's a shiny new thing and we're all excited. 5-10 years down the line, this will be much more commonplace. Then we'll see how much of this hype actually sticks in practice. If it does, like many of us here believe or hope, then we will need to have just standard access. Just like now, if you join a new business, you get an account, you get the training, you get on with it. It's not something special.
Yeah, that speaks to Amara's law, right? Of overestimating technology in the short run and underestimating it in the long run, right? Like we are all shiny object right now and we're saying it's going to revolutionize the world. And we're at this curve of everybody wants to get on board. But then in the long run, we say, whoa, this is actually much more, I can use the word invasive, that's probably not the correct term, but ubiquitous than we even thought, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Sorry, just like that. Just like now, this term we have, digital natives, kids who've grown up and they don't know, they don't remember not having Wi-Fi. They don't remember everything being Bluetooth, right? It's just part of their lives. They don't question it. They're natives. We will have virtual or spatial natives, kids who just grow up with these devices. It's part of them. And when you have a classroom full of kids who are just spatial natives to a degree, like you have to deal with kids now with mobile phones and laptops and so on, there's an opportunity to integrate that, but you also have to just deal with that reality.
Great. I'm conscious we don't have that much time, and I will ask you in the last 3 minutes to have your 1 or 2 sentence statement, each of you, the one thing to remember. But we've made a few points on the opportunity around the metaverse to create not only learning experiences that are hands-on and engaging, but also that are social. We also pointed the fact that this does not replace the face-to-face interaction that is necessary to feel that you belong to a community of learning, and that we have huge challenges in terms of deployment, maybe not so much the technical side, but the human side of things, of redefining the role of the educator. In the next 4 minutes, I want to discuss the dangers. So let's imagine that it's not the shiny new thing, it's the new normal, and you have hundreds of students connecting every day to some social VR learning experiences. What are the dangers of that new world? Who wants to have a go first? Rob, real hand, always faster.
Keep it real here. In terms of the metaverse, I think there are lots of dangers. Probably first and foremost in my mind is the concerns over privacy. And of course, there's always concerns over security and ethics. And if any of you have had the chance to listen to Kavya Perlman speak about privacy, security, and ethics, she is a fantastic speaker. And if you haven't, I would have a look for her. So that's one of the big concerns. My other concern is that as we transition from a 2D social media to a more immersive social media, essentially, one of the benefits of virtual reality of having focused attention will disappear, that someone will be in the middle of a learning experience and there'll be a pop-up and they'll be distracted to visit their virtual friends in some virtual club somewhere. And so there's a distraction piece, there's the cyber sickness piece in social VR where your avatar is moving but your body isn't. So we have to address that, and I think we probably will with some omnidirectional treadmills or some sort of walking pad, and that could be a really positive thing because you'll be walking in place in virtual reality, and that'll help mitigate motion sickness. And then, as was discussed earlier, the accessibility issue will be a bit of a concern. And so there are companies like Viata, for example, who have entire experiences on the headset, so no internet connection required. And I think we'll see more and more enterprise move in that direction. So it's not entirely internet-based, but simultaneously, I think we'll see a greater access to 5G and 6G and eventually 7G and globally, my hope is.
Michael.
If satellites aren't destroyed by exploding satellites.
So I want to just make a caveat here. I really, really think that this technology is incredible. I think that the possibilities for learning are incredible. I think we're in a revolutionary time as far as learning, as far as teaching. But I have a big concern, and I spoke to some faculty last week, and the faculty said, you know, we don't even know how to teach our students and our kids how to do this properly. Now we're going to give them this. So we can't even figure out, you know, what to do with our children who are on Instagram 6 hours a day. And there's lots of research about self-esteem. There's lots of research about cyberbullying, about a feeling of who you are as a human based on social media. What do we do when we put them into an immersive one of those? And that really concerns me. As educators, we kind of have a responsibility, right, to educate and guide learners through the pathways of life. And if we can't do it, what happens when we introduce an even more immersive version of that? And that to me is my biggest fear.
Daniel, you wanted to add on this?
Yeah, agreed totally, Michael. Tom Furness of the Virtual World Society, he gave a lecture in February 2020 called Playing with Fire. I think that encapsulates exactly what you're saying. We're splitting the atom here, and we can heat homes and power cities, but we can blow stuff up. We can blow minds up. So we have to tread very carefully. And at the same time, the industry, you know, from track records, the industry is not going to take this slowly. The industry is going to mass produce this and go hell for leather for mass adoption. I mean, we're already seeing this with a certain social media company who's made that many sales on headsets by underpricing them. They're making losses on their headsets for market share. And
not to be named here.
Not to be named here. While part of me is grateful for all the work they have done and all the investment they have put in here, because they've accelerated the industry greatly. At the same time, I share Michael's concern. You know, looking at screens is already, we haven't put that fire out, and now and the immersive thing, it can also cut off unless we get the metaverse, the open metaverse right, where now it's a tool for socializing, albeit virtually. There's a real risk.
Yeah, classroom management is always going to be a challenge when the learning is passive. This is an opportunity to make it active, to make it experiential learning. And when people are busy, my hope is that they'll be more engaged and there'll be less of an issue with classroom management. There's still going to be lots of classroom management issues, especially around cyberbullying and stuff like that. But keep them active, keep them busy. They're doing things. You know, they're hopefully that'll help mitigate some of those problems.
I feel like we should have started with this topic, because now everyone's thinking, oh my God, Daniel's got two fires going at the same time.
Well, I mean, I think there is a continuity here, which is the metaverse, however we understand it, is a new, very powerful tool for the educator that can be used for good if it's well done, but also comes with great responsibility. And I'm now paraphrasing Spider-Man, but you get the idea, and it probably likely comes down to educating the educators rather than hoping for some unnamed company to care too much about ethics. It is 4:57 London time. We have 3 minutes. In the same order as in the beginning, I'm going to ask you each your final statement on the metaverse versus the real world. If attendees today had one sentence to remember from each of you, why would that be? We are starting with Michael.
I've taken lots of airtime. I'm going to defer to Jamie on this one.
All right.
Very polite, thank you. My main message today would be for everybody here to learn from other people's mistakes. You know, I'm sure that everybody on the panel would say that they've tried a lot of things. Some things work, some things haven't. So don't go out and try and reinvent the wheel. But we've got a community of people with a lot of knowledge. So please, if you're just starting out on your journey or wherever you are, just get in touch.
Great. Rob, are you ready with your statement?
Yeah. I think we could have broken up this this discussion into about 10 different discussion areas. The metaverse is a big one, but what I would say about the metaverse is that we need to carve out a piece of the metaverse for educators, for higher education and K-12 education. And what I would love to see is open education resources, sort of a central repository of OERs in virtual reality, because VR is expensive. And I'd also like sort of the privacy and the sense of safety that students might get in an education world as part of that metaverse.
Great. Daniel, are you ready?
Yeah, thank you. My parting thoughts would be to collaborate, to join, help each other out. There's a great community of educators and like-minded people who we're all discovering this together. So please join the community, share. Communities like Educators in VR, that's exactly what we set out to do, to share resources, to meet and collaborate. This will only get solved by people like us getting together and sharing and exploring. And now is the time to explore and discover. Now's not the time for mass solutions. So join, share, collaborate. Thank you.
Great. And Michael, you played it, in a clever way to get the last word. Well done.
I would say two things. Let's be inclusive, purposeful in our inclusion, and let's think about our learners first.
Right, that was very concise. It's 5. Well done. For everyone who's asking, we are going to share the recording, and also this was the first of those panels. So we would really like your feedback. If you can scan that QR code or just go on bodyswaps.co.uk, not just .co. If you do give your feedback, we'll give you a 30-day trial, which is quite a nice thing to have for 2 minutes. We'd love to hear about what you thought, what you want to talk about next. It seemed like this could have gone on for 10 hours. So please let us know, and we try to do this regularly. I hope you found it as interesting as me. And dear panelists, thanks a lot for your time. I thought it was very, very interesting. And I'm sure we'll all speak together very soon.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Great
folks
moderating and hosting, Chris.
again. Yeah.
Thanks, sir. Cheers.
Yeah.